Hey guys, week 6, our last reading week, which is exciting. This week was entitled Culture, Class, and Communication, and we had a reading excerpt from Telesthesia by Mackenzie Wark. I will say that when I usually make these videos, I have to take a lot of takes to try to get all of my words out in a cohesive and understandable way. I've already started this over like 5 times, so I have not gotten very far. So I'm going to just try to get this take out and have it be my last take. So if I have any pauses, you might have to bear with me, but just trying to get 15 minutes worth of context or content out in one try. So to start out, this week was kind of a lot. I think I say that every week, but this one was just kind of a lot of information. And when I was first reading through like all of the different kind of stories that Mackenzie Wark was talking about, I didn't quite understand how they all connected together, I guess, or how they related at all to like media archaeology or art history or whatever. So I'll be interested, like, as the discussion continues, to kind of see what you all thought about this week's. But I did look up the definition of telesthesia starting out because I didn't know what that word meant, and basically it was just kind of perception at a distance is what it was defined as, which I think is helpful in going forward in the reading. And then I also found a pretty long summary of just the whole book. I know we only had like a few chapters from it, but the summary was helpful in kind of tying everything together. So I'm going to go ahead and read that before I get any further on this. So it goes to say that the telegraph, telephone, and television are all forms of communication that move information faster than the speed at which objects move. Both labor and capital and armies and commodities once moved at the same speed as the information organizing them. Over the last 2 centuries, social space has developed a strange folded quality where physical space comes more and more to be doubled by space of the movement of information. Telesthesia, or perception at a distance, comes increasingly to characterize how we see and hear and know the world. How does the evolution of different communication forms affect how we can perceive and act? How can the underlying infrastructure of communication forms be detected in the events of everyday life? And then I think that those were just kind of the central kind of questions of the book as a whole. So yeah, with that information, I'm just going to kind of go over some things that stuck out to me during the reading that I kind of thought were interesting or important. So first it starts out with like the Occupy Wall Street, and it was talking about how like an occupation is conceptually the opposite of a movement on page 5. Let me find that real fast. Okay, so there was I don't know. Okay, but it also brought up like this idea of a weird global media event, which is important because we see that kind of more throughout the book. Throughout more of the reading, that weird global media event comes up a lot. And another thing that kind of related to the weird global media event was when it was on page 66, I believe. Well, okay, sorry, I'm saying these pages, it's not the pages that, like, we only read 56 pages, but it's like the actual pages of the book. So page 66 goes on to talk about how kind of like a weird global event of like 9/11, and how a lot of people remember where they were on 9/11, and that was like a pretty big deal because I still remember I was only like 4 or 5 years old, and obviously I don't remember a lot and it wasn't very significant to me at the moment, but I remembered how it impacted my mom. And I know, like, you all probably remember where you were or how you felt on 9/11, which is pretty significant for so many people to have something of such a huge impact on them. And then it also was talking about but how nobody remembers the assassination of President Garfield and how that whole incident has kind of moved from living memory, which is pretty crazy because 9/11, that was 17 years ago. And then President Garfield died on September 19th, 1881. So there's nobody alive anymore. And then it kind of just made me wonder, like, in a century, are people still going to remember 9/11? Will they still talk about it? Or will it just be something of the past? And so with that weird global media event, it kind of talks about that on page 64 of the reading. And it mentions how weird global media events are kind of weird in the sense that it calls a world into being. And so it says it isn't global in the sense that it is of equal importance to everyone. And that's kind of how 9/11 was. Like, it definitely impacted the United States a lot more than it did people in other countries. But it says there's probably vast tracts of the world where nobody really paid attention all that much to 3,000 people getting killed in New York City. And I think just the way that communication, or like communication technology, how those things, information, travels around the world, that might have impacted people, how they received information. It also mentioned in the book how, like, during this time, a lot of people were trying to get in contact with other people, so it filled up a lot of the, like, phone lines, so it was really hard for people to contact other people. Mackenzie Ward was saying how his partner was trying to contact him, and he couldn't get through, like, internationally, so she had to call somebody in the Midwest, and then that person in the Midwest had to contact Mackenzie Ward in Australia. And that kind of reminded me of, we were talking about, like, the cloud, how sometimes should we be saving that for more important events? I don't know if, like, it really connects, but it just kind of was something that came up in my mind. And how we also connected that to the underwater cables, and how we were wondering if, like, we should save that for more important information. So I don't know, something to connect it to past information. But yeah, that was definitely a main part of the reading, and how just like these weird media events. And I found something that kind of related more to the media art. It was on page 29 of the book, so I need to find that real fast. But it was saying, given a will to think historically about cultural change and to give the media as a foil, two problems arise in thinking about the emergent, grammatized forms of culture. One is the problem of access to knowledge about new techniques. The other is the problem of generalizing from specific experiences. In other words, we confront a limit to what we know of time and of space. We know least about what is nearest in time, the emergent present, and what is most distant in space. The forms of culture of our antipodean others. What compounds the issue is that the things we want to critically examine, emergent media forms, are precisely what appear to overcome these problems for us, with their childlike faith in certain images and stories. This is a problem that calls for experimental practice and for critical theory, for intuitive visualization and speculative conceptualization, and in particular for low theory and media art. Struggled getting through some of those words. But this idea of media art and how we kind of have to like look through and like this whole class has been about sometimes we have to go back and look at things in the past to be able to see how our present forms of communication, technology, anything like that is kind of impacting us and how it compares to the past. And yeah, so basically a lot of information, and I think the whole concept is just kind of how like we're seeing things at a distance, if that makes sense, like going back to the telesthesia and how it's perception at a distance. So there's all this space that kind of separates us, but I think that through communication, through our culture class and communication, like what the whole concept of this unit was, just kind of how that impacts us, how we receive information, and how we view that, like view the past, view the future, view the present. So yeah, I went over most of my topics, but going back to the beginning, when I kind of gave that summary. So one of the questions that it's asked, or like it said, one of the kind of topics that you're trying to answer from this book was how does the evolution of different communication forms affect how we can perceive and act? And also another question was how can the underlying infrastructure of communication forms be detected in the events of everyday life? So I guess the questions that I'm going to leave with you guys today are both of those. And maybe I'm not going quite into it in depth enough, but I don't know. How can the underlying infrastructure of communication forms be detected in the events of everyday life? I think it kind of just goes back to what we were talking about, how I think 9/11 was a good example of that because it impacted a lot of people, and it wasn't really local for people in the sense that like if you were outside of New York, then it still impacted you, but it was kind of like the entire United States all felt that solidarity to each other. And, even outside of countries, because Mackenzie Wark was in Australia and that still impacted him. And I think just kind of the communication of being able to have such global communication with people across the world, that definitely helps. So yeah, interested to see what you all have to say, what you thought of the reading, and if there were major parts of this reading that I might have overlooked. So yeah, looking forward to see what you all have to say, and our last reading. That's still fun. It's been a good class. See you all later.